Hello and welcome to everyone who's here already. I already can't see everyone on my screen, so it looks like we're quite a lot of people, which is great. So my name's Hannah Emmerich, and I'm part of the team that's sort of organising these sessions. So I'd like to introduce David Long, who I think is going to be timekeeping today, blowing whistles at various points, and Barbara Bryant, who will also give you a fuzzy wave, and Gemma Fraser, who's a new member of the team. Gemma was working as a vicar in the Diocese of Chelmsford and oversaw her church going from naught to gold in 2 years. So they were the first church in the Diocese of Chelmsford to get a Gold Eco Church award, which is amazing. And she's now working as a communities officer for East Suffolk Council. But she is within our diocese, and so she's doing some great work promoting Eco Church in deaneries, including a meeting straight after this one, and just giving us the benefit of her experience, which is great. You'll have heard that the meeting's being recorded. That's just the main session. So when we go into breakout rooms, that won't be recorded. But just be aware of that in the main session. If you ask a question, sort of for GDPR reasons, don't mention someone who's not here by name, because the meeting will go out on our website and will be publicly available for people. If you know how to change your name, if you could change your name to put both your name and your parish, that would be really, really helpful, just so that we kind of know where people are coming from. So do that if you can.
It's the top little 3 dots in the right-hand top corner of your screen. If you hover over that, it will give you an opportunity to rename yourself. Be very careful what you type in. Sorry,
exactly. Yeah. And then we will have some chances for Q&A after the couple of presentations that we're having. But if you think of a question and you just want to ask it generally, you can also put it in the chat. And anything that hasn't been answered in the course of this meeting, we'll come back to and try and answer afterwards via email. So do that as you think of any questions. So I think I'm going to hand over to Barbara, who is going to introduce the bishop.
Thanks, Hannah. Sorry to step in there. Yes, each of these forums that we've had so far, although this is only the 3rd, is taking a different aspect of the different categories that you will already know, those of you that have started your Eco Church journey or some way down it, the different areas that you have to reach to get to the different awards. And tonight we wanted to look particularly at promoting and encouraging biodiversity, both in our churchyards or any kind of land that you might look after as a church, but also in our communities, in our church communities with individuals, different ways of how we impact the land around us. So that might be people's back gardens, it might be that they work for a school. It's just trying to get that whole idea going, and also the way that they're an opportunity to encourage engagement within your community, to invite people in who might not come into a church building, but they might come into a churchyard. So it's to look at and encourage that this evening, and who better to give us some theological inspiration on that by way of a reflection than the Bishop of Norwich, who is also the lead bishop on environment for the Church of England. And I'm going to let him explain why it's a personal passion of his, as well as a title that he has been bestowed. So over to Bishop Graham.
Well, Barbara, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. It's particularly good to see so many people on this call as we roll out Eco Church across the diocese, and I'm hugely grateful to David and all the members of the Environment Working Group for all that they do. So let's begin in prayer. Bless the Lord, dews and falling snows. Bless the Lord, you nights and days. Bless the Lord, light and darkness. Sing his praise and exalt him forever. Bless the Lord, all birds of the air. Bless the Lord, you beasts and cattle. Bless the Lord, all people on earth. Sing his praise and exalt him forever. Creator God, you made the goodness of the land, the riches of the sea, and the rhythms of the seasons. As we thank you for your gracious providing, may we cherish and respect this planet and its people, and all living things upon it, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. God of creation and Lord of life, you entrusted us to care for our environment, but in many parts of the world we have failed. Help us to realize how fragile and unstable our surroundings are, because we are not looking after your creation. We need to be true stewards and to understand how the most insignificant little flowers and the tiniest of insects, each creature and individual, add to the wondrous nature of our world, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, Barbara, thank you very much for that introduction. And in this short opening reflection for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, I want to just reflect with you on why I believe the Church of England, through our parishes and our schools, can really contribute to biodiversity. I began by using some words from the Biodiversity. Those are words that aren't all that frequently used in church anymore. They were a staple of matins in the prayer book. And if you're a matins parish, you may well use that in the traditional form, Sunday by Sunday. But the Biodiversity is a wonderful hymn of praise with that great rhythm. Bless the Lord, dews and falling snows. Bless the Lord, you nights and days. Bless the Lord, light and darkness. Sing his praise and exalt him forever. And so it goes on, a great tour of the world with springs and seas and rivers and beasts and cattle, birds of the air. And in different parts of the world, local Anglican churches have adapted that for their own nature that they see all around them, drawing into their praise in that Biodiversity, that thanksgiving, that blessed thanksgiving, all the variety of animals and plants that are living amongst them. And sometimes when I'm doing work with groups, I get them to compose their own Biodiversity for what they see around them in the countryside, what they notice, because to notice is, I think, the first step in an ecological conversion. I've always been inspired by natural history and what I've seen around me. And that became an early passion of mine, and why before I studied theology, I studied ecological science. And so in a sense, my two different interests, my two different lives come together in this role as lead bishop for the environment. And when we look at the world we live in, it is not only in a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis. And to illustrate that very simply, when did you last wash the windscreen of your car? I remember as a child that virtually every time you stopped to fill up your car with petrol, there was a squeezy thing, of foamy water to wash your car windscreen, because the bugs and the insects, particularly in the early summer, would get splattered against, and you drive along and there was a sort of massacre of insects on your windscreen. When did you last do that? When have you noticed that amount of insect life in the air? Of course, it has been hugely decimated. And the House of Commons Environment Audit Committee said in 2021 that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which is a shocking thing to have said about this country. And what we have left are the remnants of what we once had here. Now, since the 1970s, and I'm a child of the 1970s, so during my lifetime, 41% of all UK species surveyed have declined. 15% of species in the UK are now threatened with extinction. And the UK's priority species of greatest conservation concern have declined in that period of just over 50 years by 60%. And if that's not shocking enough, 492 species have been lost in England since the 1800s, including about 12% of our land mammals, 22% of our amphibians, 24% of our native butterflies. There's serious decline in the number of birds. It was rather wonderful going for a walk near Winterton the other week, because the bird species there, because of the work the Agnews have been doing on their land to enhance hedgerows and things, the farm bird species were incredibly diverse. So there is the ability to come back from some of these horrific figures. But, you know, the thrush and the house sparrow and the curlew are all much rarer birds than once they were. And, you know, insect life at the very bottom of the food chain, at the bottom of the web of creation, is so essential for pollination. About 75% of the global crops in the world are pollinated by insects, and 80% of wild plants. So there is this great cry of creation. 97% of the UK's wildflower meadows have been lost since the 1930s. 70% of floodplains are now under intensive agriculture. So no wonder we find extreme flooding in cities down river courses like York, for example, on the River Ouse. 70% of ancient woodlands have been lost or damaged in the last 400 years. And we all love seeing hedgehogs around. Well, 3/4 of all hedgehogs, in terms of the numbers of them, have been lost in the last 20 years. And we can remember back 20 years. 3/4 of all hedgehogs have been lost. That's a collective cry of pain that should be deafening, but we are somewhat deaf to it. Of course, when we turn to the pages of Scripture, there is much there around for us to ponder about the rich diversity of nature and our calling to care for God's creation. And as I said at the very beginning, the Biodiversity is a call to notice and to see. And we see in Jesus, as he walks the highways and byways of the Galilee, how he sees the lilies of the field, the birds of the air, the trees in fruit or not in fruit. Has a connection, profound connection. He knows what the stony and thorny ground is like, and what that does to the biodiversity of the landscape. But increasingly, conservationists are engaging with faith communities around conveying a message within their communities about the importance of biodiversity. There's a great overlap between where people live and where the world's biodiversity hotspots are. There's a real sense that we have an ethical comment to make in this crisis, that we've got some of the ethical resources to help us. And we also have significant land holdings as faith communities. And so the Church of England, I believe, has a role to play with both our churchyards, the land that the diocese owns, just under 6,000 acres of glebe land, and the land that the church commissions owned. This is land in our stewardship, in our care. Our churchyards are often the places in a local community where the soil, the plant life, has not been disturbed for centuries, apart from the odd hole here and there dug into it, and then the turf generally put back over the top. And that's why I'm passionate about managing our churchyards for the living rather than for the dead. How our churchyards can be places of great biodiversity. Yes, we can have mown parts of them because people do like, mown grass at the side of footpaths, but there may also be areas of our churchyards that we allow the grass to produce some, within its sward, orchids and other much diverser species of plants. But that does need to be managed. It's not about leaving it go, putting up a sign and saying conservation area and walking away for a few years. If you really are serious, you've got to manage that land carefully, cutting it back once the flowers have seeded, removing the cutback vegetation you've trimmed off it so that it doesn't become too nitrogen rich, because then the diversity of your plants won't be there. Our glebe land and the Church Commissioner's land, how can we steward that for the very best soil strength it can have? How can we look after it for farmland birds, for watercourses? How can we enable that land to really be as God would have it be, as well as producing food to feed our nation? So finally, I'd like to turn to one of the Psalms, Psalm 104, which gives me daily inspiration for the work that I do. And in Psalm 104, humans are but one of the many works of God, and there's no mention of our privilege or authority in that psalm at all. God has made the plants for people to cultivate so that they may produce oil and wine and bread to sustain and gladden their hearts. And we see that in verses 14 and 15. So that you make grass to grow for the cattle and plants to meet our needs, bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden our hearts. Yet God also provides running water for donkeys, trees for nesting birds, rain for the soil, grass for cattle, and mountains for goats and hyrax. And the psalmist, in singing this great song of praise, spends 3 stanzas, verses 20 to 22, describing the creatures that live and eat by night. So you have the wonderful verses. The mountains are a refuge for the wild goats and the stony cliffs for the conies. You appointed the moon to mark the seasons, and the sun knows the time of its setting. You make darkness that it might be night, in which all the beasts of the forest creep forth. The lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. The sun rises and they are gone to lay themselves down in their dens. So this great hymn of praise is anything but anthropocentric. It shows that we share this single island planet home of ours with a whole diversity of creatures. The earth does not belong to any or all, created species, but it belongs in its totality to God. And it's God who provides for all creatures and rejoices in all their works. The natural world is to provide for all species, and by implication, its riches are to be shared by all, not accumulated by one at the expense of the other. In 10 days' time, I'll be in Ghana in West Africa, meeting with Anglicans from throughout the world. And I was particularly struck, as I'm sure back in the Lambeth Conference in the summer, as I'm sure I will be in Ghana, by the stories of biodiversity loss that many of our sisters and brothers around the Anglican community are daily faced with. So they have to travel further and further in depleted landscapes for firewood or to collect water, because obviously when there are trees, there's a much richer vegetation, and the clouds do change as the landscape changes with less water coming in rain. So I believe that part of eco-church and part of our care for the environment is not just for our own churchyard to say how wonderful that looks, and the early purple orchids or the pyramidal orchids that we see coming up, or the birds that we see nesting in the hedges. But this is part of the whole web of creation stretching out across the world, and how what we do in this country, in the great chain of life, does have implications. When we put up our swift boxes or allow our swallows to nest, those tiny, tiny birds that just weigh a few ounces will soon be coming back from Africa on their great migration to this country, and will, well, they certainly gladden my hearts when I see the first swift or the first swallow returning from that amazing journey that they've been on, that link so many different parts of the world. Thank you.
Bishop Graham, thank you very much for that. I was meant to keep time, but I was carried away in listening to you, so didn't manage to blow my whistle. That okay, good. So now, if I may ask, we're going to have a few questions. If you would like to pose the bishop some questions. If I don't get to all your questions, I'm really sorry. So if you could then, if there are questions you want to ask or later, put them in chat. We will gather them and try and send you the answers at a later date. But does anyone have a question for the bishop? If you could put up your Zoom hand, or if you don't know how to do that and you wave, I'll see if I can see you on our two screens.
Sarah from Trouse. Hello, Sarah.
Sarah, yes.
Hello. This is very timely because we've got somebody coming from the Trouse Parish Council who manage the churchyard, and I'm meeting them to discuss how we can best use the churchyard to create an area where wildflowers will grow. So I'd like some advice, please, on what I would like, what is best to sort of to tell them, really, with regards to mowing and things like that, because this is all sort of new to us.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I would perhaps Barbara might put in the chat the links to the sort of Care of God's Acre, and also there is some other, I think there's some fact sheets within the environment pages of the Church of England about how to manage churchyards for nature. So we can put that in chat in the next few minutes. And so there's Care of God's Acre, and then there's the Church of England's environment pages where there is helpful information about that. But I do encourage good conversations and good consultation about this locally, because there is nothing more that gets people's goat going than churchyards that they say are neglected. And I get the letters. I think the archdeacons get them even more so. So good consultation to explain what you're doing, even having some signage produced to explain why, or identify some of the plants you're seeing coming up. There's Churches Count on Nature each June, which is a really great initiative, which is about citizen science project, getting local people together. And the Norfolk Wildlife Trust are always keen for their members to be involved in that sort of thing, so that you can start to identify what wildlife you have. Eton Parish Church did that last year. I went along, and it was a great community event, identifying all the species that they have there. So consultation, communication is important, and then in a sense cultivation. So 3 C's: consultation, communication, cultivation. So you work out which parts of your graveyard or churchyard you want to manage for different things. So the newer graves you will probably want to have mown, because that's what the families may well be wanting. But perhaps graves that are 70 plus years old, those areas you might want to say, well, let's leave those for the plants to grow up. But it's really important, I can't emphasize this enough, that you then do your your pole dart moment and get somebody in with a scythe and you know, cast it all back and take take away and compost that which is cut once the flowers have dropped their seeds, because you mustn't let it get too nitrogen rich, or you'll lose, you'll just have your, you know, your really fast you know, the vegetation that is much less diverse, and it might be that you want to, you know, dig out thistles if they start coming in, things like that. Okay,
thank you very much.
Bishop, we have a question from Kirsty in the chat, and then Anne-Marie.
So going green with solar power, well, there is going to be a lot of work around reaching net zero over the next 7 years, where General Synod have said we will strive to get to net zero by 2030. So there's going to be a lot of work on that. And again, I refer you to I think it's on the Church Care website. There's some really good advice about solar panels. But having said that, and this may make me unpopular, but solar panels need to be on the right church. Some of our small medieval churches, where there's a couple of services a month, are almost at net zero. And you can get to net zero more by making sure your electricity is on a renewable tariff, getting its electricity from the wind turbines off the Norfolk coast. They are not the place to put solar panels, even though we have lots of south-facing roofs, because you're not using the energy from those roofs straight away, and the feed-in tariffs now are so poor. You can do it if you'd like to, that would be fantastic. But I think the churches we really need to focus on for this are the churches that are open during the daytime all week, or on many days during the week, because then you're generating your electricity and it's being used straight away in your church. Because, you know, battery storage is very expensive as well. So we need to be realistic about where we ought to be investing that, because many of our rural churches in Norfolk are already very near net zero.
Thank you, Bishop. So I think just because of our time, and I know we want to do lots of breakout rooms, we'll have Anne-Marie's question, and then before we move to Kirsty giving the presentation. And if anyone else has other questions for the Bishop, as I said, please put them in the chat and we will try and get a response to you, but it might be after this forum meeting. Anne-Marie, if you want to come off mute. Now, Anne-Marie from Brundle, did you had a question? Off mute, please.
Anne-Marie, if you could mute, that'd be lovely, please. Unmute, sorry.
Unmute. Is it working? You're still on mute. Anne-Marie, you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, it's gone on again.
Yeah, you are. Great.
Sorry. The lady from Trouse, I was interested in what she had to say about, we did have problems in the first year when we didn't cut the grass for a couple of months, exactly as you, Bishop, saying that some people in the village were saying we were just neglecting the church, and we now do have little notice. We will have about why we're doing that, but I agree, we do need to make that more clear. Twice a year we have a churchyard session where groups of us go out and clear the leaves, and I was just wondering whether any other churches involve other members of the community in that, because I was thinking probably some families would be quite interested on a nice spring morning, you know, going out into the churchyard helping to collect. And that might be another way of involving the wider community and helping them understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and Anne-Marie, if I can point you in the direction of Corston Parish Church.
Corston.
I know in Corston, they do an annual churchyard day, I think, or morning.
Yes.
I'm sure they probably bribe people with bacon butties or something, but they have the whole communities comes together
That's what I
to
was
do
thinking.
things.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, thank you very much. Thank you.
And often it's very attractive for people who are perhaps not part of the church's worshipping community.
Yes, exactly. It's
a great way. It's one of those great interface ways
yes.
of getting people involved. And
yes, good. Thank you.
And there's some really good information in the chat about what Norfolk Wildlife Trust can offer if you scroll back up, and also about parish buying. And there's a link there. So there's lots of good information being shared.
Yes, we have had a couple of surveys done by Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Bishop Graham. So now, if I could, we're a little behind time on my whistle. So if I could hand over to Kirsty, who's going to talk about some churchyard biodiversity projects.
Okay, so I've been working very closely with our church school to get them interested in environmental things and biodiversity. Any of the websites or agencies that I mentioned, I have done a little list of them all, and I will send that to someone to pass around everybody. Some have already been mentioned. So when I came just about 2 years ago in the spring of 2021, we had a benefice day to get our 8 churches thinking about eco churches. And I think people were quite surprised at how much we were already doing, which was an encouragement for people. I then started working with our church school and the churchyard, and I got from Caring for God's Acre these great little free booklets with flower parts in and species of grass, and we had the children come down and we basically split them up, and we did fauna before break and flora after break, and went through the year groups doing that. Caring for God's Acre had lots of really, really good resources. We've also had the Norfolk Wildlife Trust in, and again, they did some sampling and told us of all the important things that we had in the churchyard. The other thing that we did with the children when we were looking at the fauna and flora within our actual churchyard, there's a place called the Field Studies Council who produce these lovely guides, great fun for children. You can open them all out, spot the butterflies, and there's even one for lichen in churchyards, and there's a lovely little one where they can count the legs on an insect. Has it got 4 or 6 or 8? Has it got 2 wings, 4 wings? And they can follow a flow chart to identify what it is they've found. So we had a great few days doing all of that in the churchyard. From that, what we have agreed with the PCC is that we have lots of churchyards, not many congregation members. The congregation members we have are very elderly. We do what you were just discussing. We ask the wider community to come and help us. But we've decided that we will rewild the very old part of the churchyard, and the school are going to do that with us. So it's a real community project, this. And we are going to take off some of the grass and actually use wildflower plugs. We've got some links within the community with gardeners and things who have been helping advise. We're trying to find some grant funding to be able to help us out with the cost of all of that. And that's going to be then an ongoing project, and it is something that is bringing different parts of the community together who, for various reasons, haven't really done much together, and church has been quite distant. So it's a lovely way of re-engaging with community. One of the things that I always start off with whenever I'm doing any of these activities is the 5 marks of mission. and we have a chat about the 5th mark of mission, which is obviously all about the care of creation and sustaining it. And I recommend this book for use with children and schools. Wonderful Earth, Nick Butterworth and Mick Inkpen, who were ahead of their time writing this. But I think that's a great way of introducing that 5th mark of mission to younger children. From all of that, within the church context, I've then made a little series of church on the beach, and we've focused on sea, sand, sky and sun. And we've been down on the beach and done church on the beach. And again, just as Bishop Graham said, particularly those psalms and the words of some of the hymns particularly lend themselves to our call as Christians to careful creation. Going forward, I've planned some other ones. Again, like you said, Bishop, using what's on our doorstep. So here in Brancaster, sessions on hedgerows, sand dunes, the tide lines that are left on the beach, which are always different and always bring something new and exciting up, and then the marshes as well and everything that goes with those. So even within a small area, even if it's an urban area, there's still lots of biodiversity to be explored and loved and nurtured. And it excites me that we need to be passing this on to the younger generations and getting them to join in this with us, because there is no planet B.
Kirsty, thank you so much. You inspire me to get cracking with my local primary school. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Does any there are some questions in chat, and anyone, you've got a bit of a curly question from Judith. I don't know how you want to do that. Should you actually plant wildflowers in churchyards may skew national flora recordings?
Haven't really got an answer for that one. We've worked with the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, who've been and told us what we've already got, and if they'd have been left, they'd have increased. But you're right, there was a complaint about it looking untidy. This was before I came, so we've had to compromise in some of what we do. We'd only be putting in what would naturally grow if it was left to grow, rather than be mown all the time.
And I think there's that thing about the Norfolk Wildlife Trust is there to help.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? I do. I had a question because I think there's something about caring for creation and biodiversity that actually speaks into something Church of England sometimes shies away, which is evangelism. And do you find that there is the ability to speak of the Christian story when you've engaged with the school children like that at a deeper level? And is there a sort of a deeper connection and attraction of church through what you've done?
There definitely has been. I think that's partly because I'm seen out and about regularly in the community, and they've got to know me and they know that they can ask any questions. And I always love the questions that they ask out of the mouths of babes. And as Jesus says, we need to care for the little children. I think they've got a lot to teach us. So it's definitely built relationships, it's building community. Yeah, I'm naturally an evangelist, so I always find a way to knit it in no matter what. It would be interesting to see if somebody else took the plans and what I've done and replicated it, if the same sorts of questions would get asked by the children.
Interesting. So good conversations, as the Bishop has already spoken about. Kirsty, thank you very much. So now we'll go into breakout rooms, which Beth will organise, and she will zap us out of our breakout rooms when we've got time. There will be a Barbara, a Gemma, Hannah and I in each breakout room, and we'll act as sort of the coordinators. So we'll gather some of the thoughts and feed it back in. The breakout rooms, as Hannah said at the beginning, are not recorded. And it would just be lovely to try and find some share ideas and experiences and ask questions. So Beth, could you do your wizardry and put us into breakout rooms? Welcome back, everybody. Very swiftly, because we try and bring everything in by 8 o'clock, is our aim. Just like to ask Gemma if she wants to, and Gemma's got something at 8 o'clock to go to. She's got to present something to the deanery. So Gemma, do you want to give a quick summary of what came up in your group?
Of course, yeah, we had great kind of conversation about what we've been inspired by, particularly inspired by the opportunity for the church to build relationships with the community and a way of gathering people together. We talked about running eco events and the importance of publicity, so getting the word out there as wide and on as many different mediums as you can. We talked about the amazing opportunities that church schools are, but how we might potentially be able to look at expanding that to community schools. Recognising capacity, the importance of invitation, so actually personally inviting people to get involved. Children's work focused on the environment, so part of the worship and teaching. Really interesting discussion about getting rid of the weeds. So if we're rewilding, it doesn't mean leaving everything as it is. You need to get rid of certain things, and then you might find that existing stuff grows before you even need to plant stuff. You give those wildflowers a chance, and the importance of having wider conversations, the benefits beyond the PCC and the senior leadership team.
Thanks, Gemma. Brilliant. Hannah?
Yeah, we had a really great chat too, I think on some quite practical things, as Gemma said, particularly about the difficulties of, it's not always just about leaving something and hoping that the right things will grow, but having to kind of manage it, or there's sometimes being trade-offs. And we said Norfolk Wildlife Trust and some of the resources that I think will flag are really useful in that. Kirsty mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, this grave talk, which is kind of getting families together to actually talk about expectations around funerals and graves and death, as a way to sometimes break some of those tensions around churchyards and sort of open a conversation more broadly about stewardship. I thought that sounded really powerful. And we said as well, it was great to hear about Church on the Beach, just as a reminder that when we think about biodiversity in a church context, we're not just talking about the churchyard, but we can engage with that more broadly in our areas and our communities.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. Barbara?
Yes, we had lots of lovely talk about things that were happening, which was very encouraging to hear from all very different areas, from city out into the more rural environments. One of the key things that came up, which has already been mentioned but was emphasised, is the idea of having signage up to explain. A lovely illustration from Lydia that she learnt from the incumbent before her, who'd had over 100 complaints, and signs helped a lot to explain what was going on. And that is that idea of invitation as well, to then have a conversation with people. It opens up the door to that, and there was quite a bit about that. Norfolk Wildlife Trust was bigged up hugely in terms of coming and recording, but then also giving you a management plan to take tasks forward, which is what they're doing at St George's, Colgate, John was telling us about. So some tasks to get to grips with. The other thing that Lydia was talking about was just how versatile our churchyards are in terms of getting the local community to come in terms of families. They put on, as part of their church's Camp for Nature, a forest church, expecting there to be lots of kids coming, and actually loads of adults turned up and they had a great time. And they discovered 42 different species of flower, one of which dated back to Saxon times. So just incredible, that idea of sharing that enthusiasm with people and opening up conversations to talk about why this all matters to us as Christians was just huge. But that idea of getting people enthusiastic about it, Harvey from Alton Broad was asking about how we can help people to recognise wildlife by giving something a name. You give it a value. So if somebody can identify stuff, then they start to care about it more. And he was asking for simple ways of doing that. various ideas were thrown about, you know, you could simply have a blackboard up where people come and pick up a piece of chalk and say they've spotted a robin or a roe deer or whatever it is they've spotted in the churchyard that day. Just a way of showing we care about what's happening in the world about us, and that sort of way, really. And at Reefham, Rachel has been doing this wonderful nature notes. It's her way of connecting with her congregation to say what she spotted this month and inviting other people to share their entertaining. She often uses pictures. So lots of different ways. And we need to try and capture them all and share them. We'll do our best to do that. Thanks so much for contributing.
Thank you. Thank you. As I'm the timekeeper and I'm aware we're now almost past the magic hour, so I'm going to be very quick, and apologies to my group, but we had an amazing discussion about sharing what we're doing, from beehives to the Norfolk Wildlife Trust to bug hotels, which was really exciting, getting young people engaged in that, to a small urban patch and with bird boxes and an oak tree, taking the leaves out to recycling centres. And then our guests, who are so welcome from just over the border in the Diocese of St Edmunds and Ipswich, connected with one church, very manicured. And how do you begin to engage with the community to allow it to get into that biodiverse nature that we're really looking for? So that was really good, and there was some good connection there. And there could be a whole new conversation just about bats, I feel. So thank you all very much, and a special thank you to Kirsty for infusing us to communicate and engage at that sort of ground level with the young people in our communities and others. And thank you, Bishop, for encouraging us to notice things, to helping us to love and engage with matins and the canticle, which was just so beautiful to hear again, and to inspire us and deepen our spirituality in all of this. I can't thank you enough. Before I ask the Bishop to close in prayer and a blessing, thank you too to Barbara, Hannah, and Gemma and Beth in the background, who do so much just to get this going. That's really kind of you. The next Eco Church Forum is on the 18th of April, 7 to 8 p.m. I hope it doesn't go past again. And our focus will be on worship and teaching. It's lovely having you all here. Once the Bishop has blessed us, Beth will do the magic thing, or if you could all actually just exit the Zoom, because there's a few of us who have to stay behind and dust down briefly. So over to you, Bishop.
Well, David, thank you so much, and thank you to the team behind this for all that you've done this evening. It's been really interesting and great reflections. As I was hearing some of the feedback from the groups, it reminded me of the 18th century natural history writer Gilbert White of Selborne, who wrote the wonderful book, The Natural History of Selborne. And, you know, as a country parson, and there's a great tradition of naturalist parsons in this country, and naturalist church wardens and others. And it all begins with noticing, paying attention to that which is around us. So let's pay attention to God. May the Lord bless us and all his creation. May the Lord keep us and all that creeps and crawls and flies and swims. May the Lord bless us and all that grows and all that is there to provide us with food. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you and those you love and that which you treasure, this and every night. Amen. Good night, everyone.